Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez had been flying Apache helicopters for 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for this mission. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Iraqi desert as her AH-64 Apache lifted off from Forward Operating Base Liberty. Her wingman, Lieutenant Jake Thompson, flew alongside in his own Apache, their rotors cutting through the dry air with mechanical precision. Intelligence reports had been flooding in all week about increased insurgent activity in the valley below. The enemy had been setting up ambush points along the main supply route, targeting American convoys with improvised explosive devices and rocket-propelled grenades. Sarah's mission was straightforward: conduct armed reconnaissance and eliminate any threats to coalition forces. As they approached the target area, Sarah's helmet-mounted display showed thermal signatures scattered throughout the rocky terrain. Her gunner, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, was already scanning through the targeting system, looking for anything that seemed out of place. The Apache's sophisticated sensors could detect a human heartbeat from miles away, and today they were picking up multiple contacts. Phoenix, I've got movement at grid reference 345789, Rodriguez reported through the intercom. Looks like 3 individuals near that abandoned compound. Sarah banked the helicopter to get a better view. The compound had been marked as a known insurgent hideout, but it had been quiet for weeks. Now suddenly there was activity. Something felt wrong about the whole situation, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The radio crackled with chatter from ground forces in the area. A convoy was scheduled to pass through in 30 minutes, and command wanted the area cleared. Sarah knew that any delay could mean American soldiers walking into an ambush. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she maneuvered the Apache into attack position. Through her targeting system, she could see figures moving with purpose around the compound. They appeared to be setting up some kind of equipment, possibly weapons. The thermal signatures suggested they were carrying long objects that could be rifles or RPGs. Everything pointed to this being a legitimate threat that needed immediate attention. Ground control, this is Phoenix, Sarah radioed back to base. We have multiple contacts at the target location, requesting permission to engage. The response came back quickly. Phoenix, you are cleared to engage. Neutralize the threat and protect the convoy route. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she lined up the shot. This was what she had trained for, but each mission carried the weight of life and death decisions. She had learned to trust her equipment, her training, and her instincts. Right now, all 3 were telling her that the people below posed a real danger to American forces. Target acquired, Rodriguez confirmed. Hellfire missile locked and ready. The compound below seemed peaceful from this distance, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving in this war. The enemy had become experts at blending in, at making weapons look like farming tools, and at turning innocent-looking buildings into death traps. Her job was to stay one step ahead of them, to protect the soldiers who couldn't protect themselves. As she prepared to fire, Sarah noticed something odd about the movements below. The figures seemed to be working with unusual coordination, almost as if they were following a script. But there was no time to analyze the situation further. The convoy was approaching, and any hesitation could cost American lives. The Apache's weapon systems hummed to life as Sarah prepared to engage. Little did she know that the figures below had been expecting her arrival, and that this entire scenario had been carefully orchestrated. The trap had been set, and she was flying directly into it, unaware that her every move was being monitored and anticipated by an enemy that knew her tactics better than she realized. The figures below had vanished into the compound just as Sarah was about to fire. This sudden disappearance triggered every alarm bell in her experienced pilot's mind. In all her missions, insurgents had never shown such tactical awareness or perfect timing. They usually scattered in panic when they heard the distinctive sound of Apache rotors, not disappeared with military precision. Rodriguez, did you see that? Sarah asked her gunner, circling the compound at a safe distance. They moved like they knew exactly when to take cover. Yeah, that was too clean, Rodriguez replied, adjusting his thermal imaging sensors. Most of these guys stumble over each other when they hear us coming. This looked rehearsed. Sarah's wingman Thompson had noticed the same thing. His voice came through the radio with concern. "Phoenix, something's not right here. I'm picking up electronic signatures that don't match typical insurgent equipment. They've got sophisticated gear down there." The compound sat in the center of a natural bowl formed by rocky hills on 3 sides. It was a tactically sound position that offered multiple escape routes, but also created perfect fields of fire for anyone defending it. Sarah realized that if this was indeed a trap, she had flown directly into the killing zone. Her threat warning system suddenly came alive with urgent beeping. Multiple radar signatures had just become active around the compound's perimeter. These weren't the crude systems usually employed by insurgents. The electronic signatures matched military-grade surface-to-air missile systems, the kind that could easily take down an Apache helicopter. "Ground control, this is Phoenix," Sarah radioed urgently. "We have multiple SAM sites active around our position. This looks like a coordinated ambush." The response from base was immediate and alarming. "Phoenix, we show no friendly SAM systems in your area. You are flying into a trap. Recommend immediate evasion." But as Sarah pulled the Apache into a sharp climbing turn, she realized the trap was even more sophisticated than she had feared. The insurgents hadn't just positioned surface-to-air missiles around the compound. They had also jammed her GPS navigation system and were flooding the radio frequencies with electronic interference. "I'm losing navigation," she reported, fighting to maintain control as the helicopter's systems began showing error messages. "They're jamming everything." The enemy had clearly studied American helicopter tactics extensively. They knew that Apache pilots relied heavily on their electronic systems for navigation, targeting, and communication. By disrupting these systems, they could force the helicopters to fly lower and slower, making them easier targets for conventional weapons. Through the static-filled radio, Sarah could barely make out Thompson's voice. "Phoenix. Losing you. Systems going dark." The isolation was immediate and terrifying. Cut off from her wingman, from ground control, and from her navigation systems, Sarah found herself flying blind over hostile territory. The enemy had managed to turn her technological advantages into vulnerabilities, and now she was flying a several million-dollar weapons platform that had been reduced to basic flight controls. But Sarah hadn't survived 8 years of combat flying by panicking under pressure. She switched to manual flight controls and began using visual landmarks to navigate. The sun's position told her which direction was east, and the mountain ranges provided reference points that no amount of electronic jamming could obscure. As she maneuvered the Apache through the rocky terrain, Sarah began to understand the true scope of the ambush. This wasn't a random insurgent attack. Someone with serious military training and resources had planned this operation specifically to target American helicopters. The coordination, the timing, the equipment, it all pointed to a much more dangerous enemy than the typical insurgent forces they usually faced. The realization sent a chill down her spine. If the enemy could execute this level of tactical planning and electronic warfare, what other surprises were waiting for her in the hills below? Sarah's years of training kicked in as she assessed her desperate situation. The enemy had successfully isolated her Apache from all support systems, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated her ability to adapt and fight, back using pure flying skill and combat instincts. Flying low through the rocky canyons, Sarah began to turn the tables on her attackers. She used the terrain to mask her approach, weaving between rock formations that would make it difficult for the surface-to-air missiles to lock onto her helicopter. The Apache's rotor noise echoed off the canyon walls, making it nearly impossible for the enemy to pinpoint her exact location. Rodriguez had managed to keep his targeting systems partially operational despite the electronic jamming. "I've got thermal blooms from at least 6 different positions," he reported. "They've got us surrounded, but I think I can get us some payback." Sarah smiled grimly as she spotted what she was looking for: a narrow canyon that led directly behind the main compound. If she could navigate through it without being detected, she could attack from an unexpected direction and catch the ambushers off guard. "Hold on, Rodriguez," she said, pulling the Apache into a steep dive toward the canyon entrance. "We're going to thread the needle." The canyon was barely wide enough for the Apache's rotor span, and Sarah had to use every bit of her flying skill to navigate through the twisting passage. Rock walls flashed past on both sides, so close that she could see individual stones and desert plants growing in the crevices. As they emerged from the canyon behind the compound, Sarah found herself looking at a sight that made her blood run cold. The insurgents had set up a sophisticated command center complete with multiple radio antennas, satellite communication dishes, and what appeared to be a mobile radar system. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a full-scale military operation. My God, Rodriguez whispered through the intercom. Look at all that equipment. These guys are professionals. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the equipment. It was the people operating it. Through her optical sensors, she could see figures in military-style uniforms moving with disciplined precision. These weren't local insurgents. They were foreign military advisors, possibly from a country that had significant experience with American helicopter tactics. The enemy's mistake was that they had positioned their command center to oversee the ambush from the front, never expecting an Apache to approach from behind. Sarah now had a perfect angle to destroy their entire operation with a single missile strike. Target the command center, she ordered Rodriguez. One Hellfire missile should take out their whole setup. As Rodriguez locked onto the target, Sarah's radio suddenly crackled to life. The electronic jamming had stopped and she could hear Thompson's voice calling urgently. "Phoenix, where are you? I've lost all contact." "I'm behind the compound," Sarah replied quickly. "About to take out their command center. Stand by for fireworks." But just as she was about to fire, Sarah heard something that made her pause. Through the radio static, she could hear voices from the enemy position below. Someone was speaking, in heavily accented English, and they seemed to be coordinating with other positions throughout the valley. The voice was giving precise instructions about American helicopter tactics, discussing specific weaknesses in the Apache's defensive systems, and coordinating what sounded like a much larger operation than just this single ambush. Sarah realized she had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple attack on her helicopter. "Rodriguez, hold fire," she commanded. "I need to hear this." The enemy commander's voice came through clearly now, and what Sarah heard made her understand the true scope of the threat they were facing. This wasn't just about taking down her Apache. It was about gathering intelligence on American helicopter operations that could be used to ambush future missions throughout the region. She had inadvertently discovered a major enemy intelligence operation, and destroying it now could save countless American lives in the future. But first, she needed to survive long enough to report what she had found. As Sarah listened to the enemy communications, she began to piece together the full scope of their operation. The foreign military advisors weren't just planning to destroy her Apache. They were using this ambush as a live training exercise to teach local insurgents how to effectively target American helicopters. The enemy commander was providing real-time analysis of her flying techniques, explaining to his students how American pilots typically responded to different threats. Sarah realized with growing horror that every evasive maneuver she had made, every tactical decision, had been observed and recorded for future use against other American pilots. "They're studying us," she whispered to Rodriguez, "learning our tactics so they can kill more of our people." Through her targeting system, Sarah could see the enemy commander pointing at different positions around the valley, explaining how to create overlapping fields of fire that would be impossible for helicopters to evade. He was essentially conducting a masterclass in helicopter ambush techniques, using her as the unwitting demonstration subject. But Sarah had heard enough. She keyed her radio to contact Thompson and ground control. "All stations, this is Phoenix. I have critical intelligence about enemy anti-aircraft operations. They have foreign military advisors teaching advanced ambush techniques." Before she could continue her report, the enemy's jamming systems came back online with renewed intensity. Not only did they block her radio communications, but they also began interfering with her helicopter's flight control systems. The Apache started experiencing erratic behavior as its computer systems struggled to cope with the electronic assault. "Sarah, we're losing flight stability," Rodriguez warned as the helicopter began to shake violently. "They're hitting us with some kind of advanced jamming that's affecting our control systems." Sarah fought to maintain control as the Apache's fly-by-wire systems began to malfunction. The enemy had clearly upgraded their electronic warfare capabilities since intelligence reports were last updated. They weren't just jamming communications anymore. They were attacking the helicopter's basic ability to fly. Through sheer piloting skill, Sarah managed to regain partial control of the Apache. But she knew that staying in this position any longer would be suicide. The enemy was learning too much about American capabilities, and her helicopter was becoming increasingly vulnerable to their electronic attacks. "We need to get out of here," she told Rodriguez. "But first we're taking out that command center." As Sarah maneuvered for a missile shot, she noticed something that chilled her to the bone. The enemy commander was no longer focused on the training exercise. He was speaking rapidly into a radio, and Sarah could see other figures around the compound preparing what looked like shoulder-fired missiles. The trap was about to be sprung. Multiple missile launch signatures appeared on Sarah's threat warning system simultaneously. The enemy had been waiting for her to commit to an attack position, and now they had her exactly where they wanted her. Surface-to-air missiles were streaking toward her Apache from 3 different directions, making evasion nearly impossible. "Incoming missiles!" Rodriguez shouted. 3 SAMs, multiple vectors." Sarah threw the Apache into the most aggressive evasive maneuvers of her career. She dove toward the deck, using the rocky terrain to mask her heat signature while deploying chaff and flares to confuse the incoming missiles. The helicopter's defensive systems were working overtime, but Sarah knew that against this many missiles, even the Apache's sophisticated countermeasures might not be enough. The first missile exploded just behind the helicopter. Close enough. That shrapnel rattled against the armored hull. The second missile lost tracking when Sarah dove behind a rock formation, but the third missile was still locked onto her Apache and closing fast. In that moment of extreme danger, with death approaching, at supersonic speed, Sarah did something that would become legendary among Apache pilots. Instead of continuing to flee, she suddenly reversed course and flew directly toward the missile, using a maneuver that no enemy tactical manual had ever anticipated. The unexpected direction change caused the missile's guidance system to lose lock at the last second, and it streaked harmlessly past her helicopter. But Sarah wasn't finished yet. With the immediate missile threat neutralized by her daring maneuver, Sarah found herself in the perfect position to strike back. The enemy command center was directly ahead, and their attention was focused on tracking the missiles they thought would destroy her Apache. They had no idea she had survived and was now bearing down on them with lethal intent. "Rodriguez, light them up," Sarah commanded as she lined up the shot. The Hellfire missile streaked from her Apache with deadly accuracy, striking the enemy command center in a brilliant explosion that sent equipment and debris flying in all directions. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition and fuel stores detonated, creating a massive fireball that could be seen for miles across the desert. But even as she celebrated this tactical victory, Sarah knew the fight was far from over. The enemy had positioned multiple missile teams throughout the valley, and they were now converging on her position from all directions. Her radio crackled back to life as the destruction of the jamming equipment restored communications. "Phoenix, this is ground control," came the urgent voice from base. "We show multiple hostile contacts moving toward your position. Reinforcements are en route, but you need to survive for another 15 minutes. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours given her current situation. Sarah could see enemy fighters emerging from concealed positions throughout the rocky terrain, all of them carrying shoulder-fired missiles or rocket-propelled grenades. The trap had been designed to channel her into this exact position, where she would be vulnerable to attacks from multiple directions. "Thompson, where are you?" Sarah called to her wingman. "I'm trapped in the Eastern Canyon," Thompson replied, his voice strained with effort. "They've got me pinned down with heavy machine gun fire. I can't maneuver to support you." Sarah realized she was completely on her own, facing an enemy force that had prepared for months to destroy American helicopters. But as she assessed the AA's tactical situation, she began to see opportunities that her training had prepared her to exploit. The enemy's sophisticated ambush had one critical weakness. They had positioned their forces to trap helicopters flying at normal combat altitudes. By flying nap of the earth, staying just a few feet above the rocky terrain, Sarah could use the landscape to mask her approach and attack individual enemy positions before they could coordinate their response. "Rodriguez, we're going hunting," she announced, dropping the Apache to an altitude that made the rocky outcroppings flash past at eye level. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse played out among the desert rocks and canyons. Sarah used every bit of terrain to her advantage, popping up just long enough to engage enemy positions before disappearing behind rock formations that blocked return fire. The enemy fighters found themselves facing an Apache pilot who refused to play by the rules they had studied. Instead of maintaining safe altitude and using standoff weapons, Sarah brought the fight down to ground level, turning her helicopter into a low-altitude gunship that struck without warning from unexpected angles. One by one, the enemy missile teams fell to Sarah's precise attacks. Her years of training had prepared her for exactly this kind of close-quarters combat, and she pressed her advantage ruthlessly. The Apache's 30mm cannon proved devastatingly effective against enemy positions, while her remaining Hellfire missiles eliminated the more heavily fortified locations. But the enemy wasn't finished yet. As Sarah engaged the last known missile position, her threat warning system detected a new signature, one that made her blood run cold. An advanced surface-to-air missile system had just gone active, one with capabilities far beyond anything the insurgents should have possessed. The missile launch was immediate and perfectly timed. Sarah barely had time to react as the most advanced surface-to-air missile she had ever encountered streaked toward her Apache with deadly intent. This wasn't insurgent equipment. This was military hardware from a major power, and it was designed specifically to kill helicopters like hers. In that moment, as death approached at 3 times the speed of sound, Sarah Martinez did something that would echo through military history. Instead of trying to evade the missile, she keyed her radio and began to laugh. Sarah's laughter echoed through the radio frequencies, reaching not just her wingmen and ground control, but also the enemy forces who were monitoring American communications. It wasn't the laugh of someone who had lost her mind in the face of certain death. It was the laugh of a pilot who had just realized she held the winning hand in what everyone thought was an unwinnable situation. "Phoenix, what's your status?" Thompson called urgently, hearing her laughter through the static. "Thompson, remember our training at Fort Rucker?" Sarah replied, still chuckling as she executed a maneuver that defied everything the enemy knew about helicopter capabilities. "Remember what they taught us about impossible situations?" The advanced missile was closing fast, but Sarah had spotted something the enemy missile operator couldn't possibly have anticipated. A narrow canyon directly ahead offered not just an escape route, but an opportunity to turn the enemy's most sophisticated weapon against themselves. Instead of trying to outrun the missile, Sarah dove her Apache into the canyon at full speed, flying so low that her rotor wash kicked up clouds of dust and debris. The canyon walls rose on both sides, creating a natural corridor that would force the pursuing missile to follow an exact path, a path that Sarah was about to exploit in a way that no enemy tactical manual had ever imagined. As she reached the far end of the canyon, Sarah suddenly pulled her Apache into a vertical climb while simultaneously deploying every chaff and flare in her defensive arsenal. The missile, traveling at supersonic speed through the narrow canyon, found itself flying through a cloud of metallic chaff and infrared decoys just as it emerged from the rock walls. But Sarah's real genius wasn't in confusing the missile. It was in timing her maneuver so that the missile would lose lock at the exact moment it flew directly over the enemy's own position. The advanced surface-to-air missile, now without a target and flying on ballistic trajectory, slammed into the rocky hillside where the enemy's command bunker had been hidden. The explosion was massive, far larger than anything Sarah's Hellfire missiles could have produced. The enemy's own weapon had destroyed their most critical position. "That's why they call it the Phoenix," Sarah radioed to Thompson, her voice filled with satisfaction. "Because sometimes you have to fly through the fire to come out stronger on the other side." The destruction of their command bunker and the loss of their most advanced missile system broke the enemy's coordination completely. Without central command, the remaining insurgent forces began to retreat in disorder, abandoning their positions and equipment as reinforcing American helicopters appeared on the horizon. Within minutes, the valley was filled with the sound of multiple Apache helicopters as Sarah's reinforcements arrived to secure the area. The trap that had been designed to destroy American air power had instead become a devastating defeat for enemy forces. As Sarah landed her Apache back at Forward Operating Base Liberty, she was met by intelligence officers who had been monitoring her radio communications throughout the battle. The information she had gathered about enemy tactics and equipment would prove invaluable in protecting future American operations. "Captain Martinez," the intelligence chief said as she climbed down from her helicopter, "that laugh of yours has become something of a legend already. Care to explain what was so funny about facing down an advanced SAM system?" Sarah smiled as she looked back at her Apache, its hull scarred by shrapnel but still intact. "Sir, they spent months planning the perfect trap to kill American pilots. They studied our tactics, learned our weaknesses, and positioned the most advanced weapons they could get their hands on. But they made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" "They forgot that behind all the technology, all the tactics, and all the training, there's still a human being making the decisions. And sometimes, when you push a human being into an impossible corner, they'll find a way to do the impossible." The enemy had indeed set a perfect trap for the Apache pilot. They had studied American tactics, positioned advanced weapons, and coordinated a sophisticated ambush. But they hadn't counted on Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez, a pilot who refused to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. Her laughter through the comms that day became legendary among American pilots, a reminder that sometimes the best response to overwhelming odds isn't fear or desperation, but the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're good enough to find a way through anything the enemy can throw at you. The missiles had indeed hit their target that day, but not the target the enemy had intended.